Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. As always, I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical. Uh, and this is my fault. I didn't ask. How do you want to be introduced today?
Trotsky 21 is fine.
Fair enough.
Or
That's
just
always
just
good.
call me Trotsky or whatever. I'm trying not to I don't really try to compare myself to Trotsky at all.
It's a good.
Just so people know, but it's more of an homage. And also sometimes it gets people to think. And the other thing is when you have the avatar and the Trotsky name, it tends to filter out a lot of idiots.
That's true. That's true because there are a whole lot of what I would call sort of backward and somewhat reactionary people who call themselves Marxist of a certain stripe who will just avoid anybody who displays the
Exactly.
Trotsky imagery.
The downside, though, is that, as you may know, well, I'm sure you know, there's a lot of socialist, communist, progressive organizations out there. In my view, uh, too many to be effective.
Very, yes, very true.
There needs to be more concentration there. But
Or they could
it's
talk to each other, which is a really radical idea that I've tried to float out there before, and that nobody really seems to take
yeah,
seriously.
Marxist sectarianism is a big problem
Marxist
on the left.
sectarianism is almost as out of hand as Protestant sectarianism,
Yeah.
especially now that the Protestants are all recoalescing around dominionism.
Tell me about it. So yeah, but when I go into those spaces, like the ACP, for example, not calling them out, I think they're a great organization, but inevitably I get all the anti-Trotskyist stuff, and I have to, like, oh, you see any ice picks lately or whatever. But
Ice axe, please at least get that part right. I love the
exactly,
ice pick joke. I mean,
yeah.
ice pick jokes are great, but
Yeah,
ice axe.
people sometimes think it's like the little needle like pick. No, it was a
I mean,
whole
that's
thing.
popular for mob. That was popular for mob hits during the same era, but this was a completely different culture of assassination.
The disagreements, though, are not really fundamental to the issues presented to the working class today, and so this Marxist sectarianism needs to go
I,
away. And I think
I agree.
ACP has, they've given at least me, as a Trotskyist, a little bit of space to, be involved and speak.
I I have
So that's
strong
fine.
feelings about the founders of the ACP that we will not
Yeah, I
talk
don't
about.
want to. I agree with you, but I do not want to get into that.
And I also have, well, no, my criticism, and I mean, I'll call them out. I don't care about about catching heat. My criticisms of the Midwestern Marx Institute would be a show of themselves, and it would need like a panel to do it justice. So
Hmm.
I'm not going to get into that either.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say, yeah, I know what you mean. There is a lot of, regardless of what one thinks of the organization and whether it has value, there's definitely a lot of reactionary thought huddling around its skirts.
Yeah, the main thing I think, if we can just focus this,
And move ahead, yes,
yeah, is center the working class, the
yes,
class struggle, and the working class, the subjective working class analysis in everything that you do, and this sectarianism will go away. That's what I
yes,
do, and that's what everybody who's a Marxist, communist, and socialist should be doing.
and
The moment
and I
they're
think
not doing that, they can be called out.
and I think what every revolutionary socialist, regardless of their sectarian affiliation, should be doing right now is number one, talking to each other, because
Yes.
honestly, there needs to be some sort of coalescence. Even even if you are the most milk toast reformist centrist and you are committed to a popular front, well, what good is a popular front going to do if all these little set Marxist sects won't talk to each other and can't get enough of a voting bloc together to be useful to liberals?
I couldn't agree more. Uh, but that's a whole nother show,
That
Chris.
is, that is, and that's where. And now I'm going to move on from there because I think that's
Yeah.
like the final thing that we can really say on it without getting off topic.
Yes, very much. So
Um,
I sent Chris some notes, and so we're going to kind of work off of that, but we're not going to be, fix the idea on
and
it.
and
But yeah,
for those who are not who have not seen the tweets and are just now tuning in, the topic is dead labor economies. What
and
are
how to
dead?
destroy it.
How to destroy them? But what are they? What do they mean for
Yeah.
workers? And what does that mean for political organizing?
So this is not in the notes, Chris, but let's be upfront about the fact that I think I know I have, and I'm pretty sure you have. We've seen the presentations of, I think it's Gary Stevenson, is that his name, on dead labor economy on
Gary
YouTube?
Stevenson. Let me
Yeah.
take a quick double check. That
I
sounds
think I
familiar.
sent you that link. Anyway, the
I think
guy,
so.
so I just want to give credit where credit is due because he's really been raising this issue in a big way over in Britain. And so I think that's all good. But dead labor is not a new, and he calls it, I don't know if, I think he does use the term dead labor economy, but the concept of dead labor economy has been around for a long time. Marx, as we know,
Yeah.
called it ossified labor. So
Yes.
what does it really mean, right? And think of it this way. Look at the economy of the United States in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Everybody, like 90% of the population, are wage workers. They're in factories. They're producing things. They're making cars. They're making goods people need. These goods tend to last a long time. Briggs and Stratton motors and everything.
Yes.
That, of course, means you have to pay workers. Workers can unionize. But the whole process is living labor creating social utility.
Yes.
In the 50s and 60s in the United States and largely throughout the West, that social utility largely benefited the workers. In France, for example, they call it the years from 1945 to 75 are called the 30 glorious years.
Yes.
Trentes glorieuses, or whatever
Those
it's
are
called in
those are
French.
the years where France, I mean, obviously France is still ahead of many countries, but those years specifically from 45 to 75 are the years where
Yeah.
France and the UK had some of the best welfare states in the world, the
Oh,
best
yeah.
health care,
And,
all
and
completely funded, all completely funded, it should be mentioned, by the US government that denied those same aspects of social democracy to its own people during the same period.
well, I wouldn't entirely agree with that, the Marshall Program, but there was an enormous
Well,
amount of
also
space
NATO.
created by the U.S. for that to happen.
Also
Yeah,
NATO.
yeah, yeah.
One of the things that it's important to understand, and I'm by no means defending NATO, but the attack on NATO right now by reactionaries like Trump is not an attack on the empire. They love the empire. It's an attack on the European welfare state. They want
That's right.
all the countries in NATO to up their contributions to NATO's
And
defense
that's
budget.
going to end the welfare state if they do it. And there's a lot of resistance to that already
because
emerging in
because
Europe.
it's the US and NATO underwriting the European defense that has allowed them to build up the European
Well,
welfare.
the U.S. manufacturing an enemy that
Yeah,
requires defense spending.
yes,
Yeah.
that too.
So anyway, so the opposite of, let's say, a productive economy is a non-productive economy where everything's
Yes,
been built, it's already been built, and so what a lot of the activity is involves controlling, manipulating, financializing things that are already existing. So
yeah,
housing's a great example of that. So when something is already made, the labor is over. The process of living labor creating social utility is finished. So the object sits there. It can be consumed like food, or it can be manipulated and financialized. And
and
so,
this is
yeah,
precisely, I hate to break in, I'm sorry, but this
all
is
right.
precisely why that we have a property management model that chooses to maximize the balance of collecting as high as possible a rent
Yeah,
on
and
occupied units while leaving as many
yeah,
units
and
vacant as we can afford to leave vacant.
we'll get into that. I've got
Yeah.
stuff here about how that process actually has happened and how it works. So, a dead labor economy is where the lives of workers are primarily controlled by not by the process of production in which they are involved, but by the process of manipulation and financialization of already existing assets, which can only be done by the capitalist class or by the ruling class. So this leaves us, the working class, high and dry.
Yes. It leaves
So
the working class without work,
that's
and
right.
worse, without work, without necessary work. It also strips the working class of one of its biggest
Right.
political weapons, which is the ability to withhold its labor.
So, just to sum up, if an economy is oriented around financializing already produced things, housing being a good example, then the need for living labor is reduced, the quantity of goods produced stagnates or declines, and existing assets inflate in value because new ones aren't being produced at all or at a sufficient level to
And the
maintain.
ruling class become rent seekers.
Yep,
Whereas ultimately, instead of talking about capitalists, we're talking about landlords.
that's right. And
And what did Adam Smith, Karl Marx, and Mao Zedong all say about landlords?
oh, whenever, yeah, the number of landlords or the culture of landlords is always a really good indicator as to how close you are getting to social revolution.
Yes.
So let's move on to what I have in the notes is section two. How did the West or the U.S. become a dead labor economy?
Yes. Because that's
So
an important
let's
question.
start with something. Let's go a little off and put up something that's representative of this process, although it began a little bit earlier. Let's put up image 12.
Let me find this here. Yes. And now let me make sure I have that window shared. Sorry for muttering to
No
myself here for
problem.
a moment. All right. Present, share.
I don't know. I could probably do this. Can I put up the images myself, or how does that? I don't even know how that.
You might be able to.
Well,
That
I don't
is,
want to muck around with it now, so let's
here we
just.
go.
I should have figured
There
this
we
out
go.
earlier, I
Share.
guess.
And
There we go. Okay,
yep.
perfect. Yeah.
Whoops. And then I took it out by mistake like a fool. That's better. There
So
we go.
this is something. The reason we're going to go into how this happened in the United States in brief, but so Americans may not be as familiar with, and I assume the audience is primarily American here, or going to be. So,
I have a regular download in Belgium, but I mean,
oh
yeah,
yeah,
primarily American.
but this is a representative process that has occurred throughout the West, but Britain's just a tighter example that you can make. In the U.S. it was a little more complicated. But so 1979, this is Margaret Thatcher
Yes.
with her flagship, and this is the word they used, flagship program of right to buy. So the family you see there is living in a council house. They're maybe paying about what would be equivalent today of something like $10 or $20 a week to stay there, which is the maintenance cost for the building or the flat. And now they're buying it because this was Thatcher's right to buy program. It was talked about in Parliament actually for something like a decade. And then Thatcher managed to get it enacted with some support from Labor, I might add.
And I can understand why, because everybody who's thinking in the terms of class mobility rather than class struggle
Right.
wants workers to have the right to buy their houses and become middle class.
Yeah, and here they are. They're buying their house. They're buying their council house. No longer renters, they are now owners. But they now also have to pay a mortgage. The
Yeah.
vast majority of people who purchased their own council house were had to mortgage the entire purchase amount from a bank. So, just for reference, put up image 13. This is from the Bank of Scotland. They're still doing this. People are still buying council houses, but they're taking out mortgages to do it.
And image 13. There we go. Good. And present.
And by the way, most of the people in so called council houses I don't know the exact figure, but it's like 60 to 70%, actually live in flats in apartment buildings. So this is a Royal Bank of Scotland. This is their one of the pages that you go to if you want to buy a house, including
Yeah.
council houses. But note the part at the bottom, which I've highlighted and put exclamation points by.
Yep, I see.
Yeah. Now, when you lose your home having bought your council house or flat, who gets it? Does it go back to the council? No.
That's a good question.
No,
The
it doesn't.
bank, because the bank has the mortgage.
No, it doesn't. Yeah, the bank gets it, and
It's
then they can do whatever
back,
they want with it.
it's a backdoor privatization scheme.
And that's exactly what happened, right? So, and by the way, Britain's largely stopped building council houses around about the 1960s or so. And so the amount of council houses that are in existence that are still publicly owned council houses has vastly declined. And at the same time, there's now a homelessness problem.
Yes,
But
and
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead. Sorry, Chris. Go
no,
ahead.
no, and I was going to say, and because of their redistribution of housing, and because of the race to the bottom of new labor when they attempted to open some new construction, the social housing that does exist that isn't gone is now owned by private landlords who are profiting off government subsidies.
Yeah, and or bundling the assets up and selling them in the market,
And
as
and
part of
because
bonds.
and because they're doing these privatized government contracts, they have every incentive to maximize what they charge the government and minimize their actual expense so they can hold on to all that subsidy money. And that's how you get Grenfell Tower.
That's right. That's exactly right. So let's just, for reference, what was life like for people when there were council houses, right? So let's look at image 8.
Yes, let us look at image 8. Oh, yes. And this of course is a very, very evocative image to me,
Yeah.
enjoying rock and roll as I do.
Yeah, me too. George Harrison in front of his brand new council house, or his
Yes.
family's brand new council house in England.
Yep.
His family was paying the equivalent of about $1 a week to live there.
Yes.
And it was that allowed George Harrison to study and get good at his guitar rather than working in a coal mine or living in some dump
Yes.
somewhere where he's subjected to crime or whatever.
As
So,
as a comparison, in the 1980s, the Talking Heads were able to be successful because they were all ruling class college kids whose
exactly.
bassist was an in-law of the family that then owned the Washington Post.
Yeah. And of course, I'm sure you've heard about the author of Harry Potter. I forget her name.
Yes,
What's her
J.K.
name?
Rowling, the
Yeah.
horrible,
She
the
lived in a
horrible
council house and
beautification.
got
Yes,
welfare, you know.
yes,
And so while she was living in a council house and got welfare, she wrote her book.
yes.
Now, in
And
an
she was,
economy where you have a precariat that has low wage jobs and high rents, nobody has the time to do this.
and there are books that don't exist here in America because their authors were not able to write them.
That's exactly right.
And that's one
So,
of the great tragedies to me of this kind of capitalism, as silly as that is
no,
the
that's
real destruction of art.
we don't know what we have lost. We can only look back at the past and see that all of these wonderful things happened, like the Beatles, like Harry Potter. I'm not a big Harry Potter fan, but a
I'm
lot
not.
of people are.
I mean,
But
it's one of those
all
things.
this wonderful creativity, by the way, this creativity, it always comes out of the working class. It doesn't come out of the ruling class.
It's
So
true.
all this creativity is being lost because people are being squeezed between high rents and low wage jobs, and they don't have the time. You don't have the time to write a book if you're scrambling around working a low wage job and then having to decide whether to buy food or medication for your child. right?
And the few great artists who do come from the ruling class are often class traitors and champagne communists of the most embarrassing kind.
Yeah, and I think you're gonna. I mean, I perceive it, but it may be just a function of getting to be older. Just a general decline in creativity in the artistic spaces as a result of this process.
This is something else that's worth a show of its own. But I talked
Yeah.
about this with Edward Angueso Jr. in a show we did about AI. Is that you're
Oh,
seeing?
AI! Don't even get me
Well,
started. Just
but
absolute
no, I want to.
garbage.
I'm bringing it in because AI is an attempt to turn the most important living labor economy, where the living labor is the only reason the economy exists, which is, art, writing, journalism, anything that involves individual initiative and effort and creativity to actually produce the product.
Why
They
are
want to
we?
turn that into completely dead labor, where
How?
everything is
That's
generated.
exactly right. AI is another. But thank you for bringing it up. AI is a good example of converting the artistic and creative spaces into dead labor economy.
And Sports Illustrated was busted doing this just before they disappeared from stands for several months and were miraculously saved by an angel investor.
And not to get too far off track, but what is the purpose of our lives? Right? We don't know. So we go through our life and we create meaning. People
Yes,
do it in different ways. People sometimes find meaning in going to church or going to the VFW or fishing, or they every day people have to create meaning in their life that means something to them. And if you care about others, you want to try to create meaning for others. That's what we're doing here with this podcast. We're
yes,
creating meaning for others. Well, if you take that space and turn it into dead labor economy, you're destroying that process of creating meaning.
yes. And the corporatization in the form of the huge monopolization of intellectual property undertaken by massive
Mm-hmm.
companies like what used to be Warner Brothers and is now, I laugh every time I think about this, the Discovery Channel, which is, despite its innocent and scientific sounding name, run by some of the most reactionary Christian whack jobs in the
Yeah,
country.
discover nothing.
Yeah.
So
And
so
Disney, of course, the rat that
let
ate the world.
let's very briefly go into how this dead labor economy manifested in the U.S. There's an enormous amount of material on this. We're not going to cover it in any depth just for
Sure.
a couple of minutes, but let's put up image 16 just
Yeah.
as or actually, let's do image 15 first.
Here we go. Yes. Yes. I'm going to actually read some of this out loud just a sec, because this is
Sure.
worth. I'm tremendously interested in housing policy because despite the dead labor economy, housing is one of the areas where if we made effective use of our resources, we would actually have a housing surplus. We have more
Oh
housing
yeah.
than we have households.
Yeah, but we can't. But we don't. They don't want to do that, and we'll get into that too
Yeah,
later.
but the tenant never wins.
Right.
Private
So
takeover of public housing puts rights at risk in New York City.
yeah,
2022.
that's a public housing project,
Yes.
and it's being stealthily transferred over to private interests.
Yes. Now this is a good story in that there was this one specifically, there was sort of a happy ending and the tenants sort of won. They stopped the privatization and the building of new luxury units in the middle of their
Hmm.
supposed affordable housing project. But this is still happening in New York City
Oh
every
yeah, every month it seems like.
and
But
and
here's the thing: about 10% of the population of New York City lives in public housing. That's a
yes,
much lower percentage now than it was, 30 or 40 years ago.
that's a
But
much lower percentage than it was back in the 1950s when public housing enabled Howard Schultz to build up enough of a nest egg to go on and become a billionaire.
and Trump's dad.
Yeah.
But
Well, but Trump's dad was profiteering off public housing too.
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
This is the
Howard
privatization and
Schultz had to live in
financialization of public
housing
assets.
as a kid.
Yeah. So we can put up image 17, or I'm sorry, 16.
16. It would help if I clicked on the right thing first sometimes. Ah, yes, our good friend REITs. This is, you see, because again, housing policy.
Yeah, yeah. So this
I
goes
live,
into.
I also rent, so I live in a complex owned by a trust fund.
Oh, fantastic.
Here we are. Yes, here we go. Real estate investment trust.
So I'm just putting this up as an example of the very many mechanisms that are being used to do this financialization of how the housing stock in the
The,
United States.
the
Real estate
commodification.
investment trust being a good example of that. And so people can
Yeah.
go online and read up more about it. But one of the things that they might find, which if you're like me, will cause you to become angry, is that this is a lot. A lot of politicians are invested in
Yes.
rights. All right, and so they invest in rights, and then they pass laws to give themselves tax exemptions. And so, like one of if you read the description there, rights can pay larger dividends than almost any other type of investment
Yes.
vehicle because they've created this legal fiction to give money to themselves by the financialization of already existing assets.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating about this is that
Are they giving tax breaks to people to build new housing affordable? No, they're giving tax breaks for these things.
and what's hilarious is this makes houses less affordable by making it all about protecting somebody. This is the grossest thing about this because I was looking a lot into both REITs, sorry, rights, and traditional trust funds.
Yeah.
As a result of looking into how legacy media is funded. One of the fascinating things is that both nowadays rights and more traditionally nonprofit investment trusts are one of the ways that our wealthy overlords keep their kids wealthy.
Yeah, generational wealth at the expense of everybody else. And
I
we'll get
live
into
in an
that.
apartment complex that is owned by a real estate investment trust that was set up to keep some rich guy's heirs wealthy without
Yeah.
them having to work.
Yeah, and let's also get rid of the estate tax,
Yes.
which they have done. Let's go to image 17.
Yes. Let's.
We were supposed to spend 10 minutes on this. I think we've spent more. That's my fault, not yours.
That's fine. I mean, I've said frequently to folks that whoops, that's the wrong one. Where am I? Okay, I see where I am. Image 17. Close.
So I'll just so the public housing was a function of various federal government incentives that fell
Yes.
under in modern times Title IX.
Yes.
And so this image will show that the government has essentially abandoned this Title IX.
Yes.
They haven't abandoned rights. You know, they've
Yeah.
set up these other mechanisms to financialize the existing assets while they have abandoned the mechanisms to actually create new housing.
Well, the gross thing is that one of the problems of Title IX replacing traditional public housing is that Title IX doesn't actually obligate landlords to accept Title IX tenants.
Right, that's right. So let's move on to image 2.
Yes. Let me close these.
Anyway, this graphic just shows that there's a tremendous need for public housing,
Yes.
but literally no funding, totally inadequate funding to meet the need. I don't
Well, and
remember.
I have strong feelings about this because of the surplus that we're talking about, but this is still a very useful graphic because it also shows this is a great graphic.
Yeah, and this will tie into some other stuff we're going to talk about too. But go ahead, Chris.
But you look at the spikes in building and then the crashes
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the spikes and the
Now the
crashes.
the main takeaway I think from this is when you look at the peaks,
Hmm.
the bigger peaks occurred in the 70s,
Yes.
uh, when the population of the United States was around 180 to 200 million.
And
And so we're producing less than half of that level of housing now for a population that is one third larger. And in effect, that means the average housing unit has to be in existence now for 95 years just to maintain a stable housing stock, right? Most housing units only last about 40 to 50 years, maybe 55. That you can look, I would have liked to have had like a couple hundred graphics for this, but
yeah,
you can look up what is the average lifespan of a housing unit in the United States, around 50 years, 56 years, something like that. So, and so what this is the conversion of an economy which is producing a lot of housing units relative to population to an economy that's producing much less for a larger population.
what
And so this then leads us to the question is what is the actual effect on the working class from this conversion from a productive economy to a non-productive economy or a dead labor economy or as Tyner puts it, a necro-capitalist economy.
well, if you will forgive me a snarky, well, I have to pretend to occasionally
Whoa,
be
whoa, whoa! We can't have any snark, man. What are you talking
if
about?
we have to pretend to be entertaining to keep
Oh,
people
that's right.
and
Yeah.
sort of
Okay. So
respond.
let's turn on the snark.
So you look at this, and the first thing you notice is that building levels have never gotten to the point they were at right around the 2008 housing crash,
Yeah, and a lot of those houses ended up being
and that
abandoned.
we've had a whole bunch of these little mini crashes every time anything peaks since.
Hmm. Oh, and
And
we're
the,
about to have another one too because
and
the building materials cost
yeah,
has now just
because of
jumped thanks
tariffs.
to the Trump tariffs. Yeah,
The Trump tariffs. Yeah, how much concrete comes from someplace else now?
and also not to get too far aside, but something like 50% of the construction workforce, migrant labor, and they're all disappearing because
Yeah,
either they're being deported, but mostly it's people are
and
the migrants are
and the
afraid.
and the quote unquote labor aristocracy of the building unions, of course,
Yeah,
are
they
the people
probably.
who
I didn't look
supported
into
Trump.
that, but they probably contribute. Like, there's a big house, there's a big apartment construction
Yeah.
project going on a few blocks from me, and I happened to be over there, and I had a question, so I went up to the one of the workers,
Hmm.
get a group of workers doing their taking a break or lunch or whatever. None of them spoke English, right? I had no idea whether they're there quote legally unquote or not. But if those people disappear, what's going to happen to our ability to construct housing? Now,
Well,
I'm not saying that migrant labor, is a highly exploited form of labor and we need that. We don't. We should pay all workers, right?
so
But in this system, that's not going to happen.
well, the good news, and I say this with the good news, I with a very heavy sarcasm dose. The good news is that labor isn't going to disappear. Migrant labor never disappears because of strict border enforcement. In fact, migrant labor frequently becomes more profitable for the big business that traffics the workers because of strict border enforcement. One of the famous deportations of the Trump era, an ICE raid on a chicken plant, was triggered. Weird coincidence. ICE raided the place the same year they won a court case against their boss that guaranteed them rights.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly they're raided by ICE and all deported, and we're bringing in new workers who haven't organized a union. Is that a coincidence?
No, it's part of the
And
plan.
and see, tough enforcement like that makes it really convenient to turn over a whole workforce and bring in completely new workers
I
if
think
you're
you,
tied in with the right traffickers.
Chris, are you suggesting the capitalist class will do things legal or otherwise to attack unions?
I would
That's
suggest that
outrageous.
I would say that disciplining labor becomes even more important in a dead labor economy than in a living labor economy, because you've got all these unemployed workers sitting around who, might become
Yeah.
violent if things.
Well, let's say in a living labor economy, it's far more difficult to discipline labor
Yes.
because people are, working, they've got jobs, they can unionize
They can
en
withhold their
masse.
labor.
But in a dead labor economy, the amount of workers is generally smaller relative to population. They're because they're smaller, there's less assets available, less wealth available to the whole working class generally.
I'll ask
So
you another
it's
question.
very easy to discipline what's left of labor in a dead labor economy.
Perfect example. Do you think that it is coincidence that whatever we think of it, whatever we think of their deficiencies and their strengths, you think it's a coincidence that what had been an extremely anti-Trump legacy media was massively disciplined in the form of layoffs and AI and all sorts of changes to the way their job works just before Trump became president again?
Oh, the disciplining of media generally in the capitalist system has been like an abominable thing to watch. I don't know that there's any direct causal relationship between Trump, but it is something. Look, the capitalist class spends hundreds of billions of dollars on their media throughout the West every year. They recognize the importance of a propaganda system. So they're not in the media spaces, they're not going to tolerate dissent. And in those spaces, they have the power to quash it. Why? Because they own it. They literally own it. Rupert Murdoch can call up anybody or whoever's controlling it now. That person is fired.
Since,
It's
since you
easier to
mentioned
discipline the media than it is to discipline a union.
It is. And Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, and
Exactly.
Patrick Soon-Shiong owns the Los Angeles Times.
Yeah.
And on that subject, I'm going to name drop my show with Edward Ongweso Jr. again. One of the things that came up in our discussion of billionaires and disciplining of labor forces was that Elon Musk is an Afrikaner. And, Peter Thiel is also an Afrikaner.
I know, it's the South African mafia.
And while people are not aware of it, and he, of course, is not an Afrikaner, Patrick Soon-Shiong is from South Africa.
Well, again, that's a whole nother show.
It really is.
I've read so much stuff on this South African mafia.
I'm going
It's
to
just
mention
unbelievable.
one more thing, though, because I'm going to go back to Elon Musk, because it's so relevant to our timely disciplining of federal government labor. While Trump
that's absolutely going on.
Elon, we talk about the Musk a lot. Errol Musk is, of course, a popular caricature of a human being in the South African media. But it's really interesting to discuss the Haldeman side of Musk's family. This is a segue.
Is that the same Haldeman that I'm talking about?
Not H.R. Haldeman. No, it's an interesting coincidence, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's actually scarier. Joshua Haldeman.
These fucking ethnic Germans.
Joshua Haldeman.
Excuse my language.
Joshua Haldeman was arrested in 1940 for his activities in Canada in connection to a group called Technocracy Incorporated. The best way to describe Technocracy Incorporated is a polite Canadian Nazi movement.
I did read about that, yeah.
Technocracy Incorporated blossomed out of a sort of kindler, gentler Nazi movement in the 30s called the Technocracy movement.
Yeah, it's techno-fascism. It's fascism. Updated.
They loved Hitler and Mussolini, and it was basically the preamble to the network state that Elon Musk is pushing now, and Peter Thiel and Gary Tam and all those people. But with that in mind, Joshua Haldeman was arrested for working with what was essentially a preamble to the network state in 1940, a year after Canada had been at war with Nazi Germany. So
Yeah. I
Joshua
know.
Haldeman was arrested for collaborating with the enemy in 1940. Let's just be simple about it.
I mean, there's probably hours and hours of video,
Yeah.
good video on this, and I've watched
May
some of it, and it's just abominable.
May
The whole history.
Haldeman Musk.
Let's if we can. We got a lot of material to move on to, so
I want to
I
finish
want to
this story and get it out.
get it out of your brain.
May Haldeman Musk was born in 1948 after her father had been out of prison for a little while into World War II, all that. They moved to South Africa in 1950.
Yeah, because they like the idea of apartheid.
Because Joshua Haldeman loved apartheid. He immediately joined the National Party and became a political activist for the most gung-ho pro-apartheid wings of the South African
racial supremacists.
So Elon Musk on his mother's side is a third generation Canadian Nazi. That's worth noting.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, I know that, and every time I look at that guy, I think of it. But just to use a common phrase, don't get me started on that.
No, but this is something that adds context to the rest of our conversation. And
well, I mean, you can see this. There's a general movement towards fascism all across the West, and you can make the connection. I didn't develop any material about this, but it's fairly obvious. I mean, for this show, it's fairly obvious that the concentration of wealth, the dead labor economy, is going to result in authoritarianism.
Yes,
I mean that's inevitable. Power follows wealth. If wealth is concentrated, that means less democracy, less governance. I mean, it's obvious. Trump is ignoring the Constitution in many instances. They're making threats to do even worse to people in open violation of the Constitution. But this is there's a direct connection between the concentration of wealth, the precarious state of the working class, and the rise of fascist and authoritarian systems, which also will include things like, racism and the intent and action to create division within the working class with non-material issues like transgenderism, race, migrants, religion, the whole toolbox of working class division, which is inevitably used mostly by the capitalist class with a few allies with
the color that it's taking now, which appears to be the most acceptable for mass consumption by American would-be fascists, is hating queer people.
Yeah. Let's. I really want to get to some of this other stuff.
Dead labor economy.
Because if I don't, I'm going to kill myself.
I understand. No, this is important. This is very important.
The next segment is, what does a dead labor economy mean for the working class? So this is like the where it bites, right? This is where it bites into the working class. So let's put up images 11 and or image 4. I don't know if you can do 2 or 1 at a time.
I want to make it easier for people to see, so I'm going to go with 4 first. And I'm going to give a shout out to a colleague, Jamar Jabari. Jabari Vach Media says, at work listening to the show. Folks, if you do have Roku TV and you are willing to spend a little bit for the Connect Hub channel, I really want to stress that, to the best of my knowledge, Jabari Vach Media is the only communist host on capitalist television that I'm aware of, and you should check him out.
Interesting. I haven't seen it, but I'm glad that's on my radar now. Listen, and by the way, can I just not to step into the host's shoes, but I have no idea if anybody's watching or or even interested, really. But if anybody wants to put up a comment, please do. It's I'm not averse to being encouraged.
I know, and I definitely want to know what people want to say, and I try.
Yeah, especially reaction to some of the substance that we're trying to share.
Yes, because this is important stuff, especially if you're involved in organizing your workplace, which we all should be if we possibly can.
Yeah, in some way, definitely. So let's get whatever image,
up
which
there,
is the next in the queue here.
Image 4. British housing as a proportion of wages.
Yeah, so this is probably the figures that I worked up and tweeted about, and rather than get the all the different sources, I
Yeah.
just figured I'd use
This
my own
is,
tweet as the source.
well, and I hate to say it, and it's part of why the fascists love Twitter now so much, but part of the way the algorithm is changing is you actually probably get more people to see it if you don't link your sources.
I have no idea, but that's probably true. So, and we'll show the same thing has happened in the United States. So, average wages as compared to the cost of a housing unit,
Yep.
you can see that that has almost tripled in Britain, which
Yeah.
in effect means that purchasing a housing unit or owning, getting some kind of ownership of a housing unit, whether it's through a mortgage or outright purchase, is way more difficult, which means for a lot of people it is simply not possible during the course of their entire life. They're never going to be able to accumulate enough assets to do it.
So simple numbers. I am 48 years old as of yesterday. Happy birthday to me. My wife really wants to buy a house, which I totally understand. Owning a house is the American dream, right?
I don't think it's the American dream. I think it's a human dream.
That's good. But average mortgage nowadays is what, 30 years?
Yeah.
So, I'd be expected if I live that long to pay off my mortgage by the time I'm 78.
Yeah.
Now,
So let's look at the U.S. situation, which is the next
that's
image,
where I'm getting ready to move us now. Thank you.
which is I guess 11.
Yes, it is. And that's where I want to. Oh, I see what I'm doing wrong. Never mind. Oh, I need to get more organized. There we go. And close this one because that matters. And then that makes this easier.
Have you ever had a guest that has come in with
I
all
need
these
to be
images?
better at the production end of things anyway.
No,
So
I'm not. I'm not. If you're not, you. I mean, I couldn't.
I do not spend a lot of time sharing the screen as much as I should. I do a lot of talking. I don't like to do anything that would potentially get me dinged for anything copyrighted.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I'm careful.
So same process in the United States. I had to sort of limit the data I was using because some of it wasn't available. But it's the same basic
Yeah.
process. You see that the ratio, the average worker wages, which that excludes like high wage earners.
Yes.
Because they don't have a problem. Their wages have kept pace with inflation.
I will
But
note.
same process in the U.S. Effectively, it's about a
I,
third more of your wages if
I
you're a worker
will
in the United
note that
States.
in some rental markets, Los Angeles and New York are the ones that come to mind. Even high wage earners are actually
Yeah,
struggling
they're even high
to
wage
take
earners
their
are
rent
priced out of
paycheck to
some
paycheck
markets. That's true.
because of ridiculous rents and property values in those cities.
Yeah, but we also, and the thing is, we do have a fairly large segment of the population which has generational wealth. I mean, there's
We do, and
probably
that's part of the problem, especially in those cities where Los Angeles and New York are two of the ruling class meccas of this country these days.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, apartments in Manhattan, in many areas in Manhattan that are not public housing, rents are $5,000 a month.
Yep.
You know.
And it's worth mentioning that this is actually in the United States serious to an extra degree from in the UK because of a difference of the way poverty is calculated.
Yeah, and also there's a lot more land.
I can
Uh,
I can never say this too much though. The United States poverty calculation is based on 3 times the expected household budget of an experienced, savvy housewife in 1963, multiplied by today's inflation rate. And that's all it is. And it
that's
doesn't
it.
even include housing.
That's a coincidence because that's where this figure
I
starts.
know. But
Let's go to image 18.
it doesn't. Our poverty calculation assumes no one has to pay for housing.
That's probably a whole nother show too.
That is a whole nother show. In fact, I have a whole nother show just about our poverty calculation. It's one of my few solo shows. Sorry, which image number again?
18.
18. Thank you.
Yeah, this is just, kind of a more anecdotal sort of example, but I'm
Yeah.
sure that anybody living in a city in the United States has seen this type of thing.
Yes.
And I should have gone out and got some pictures from my own neighborhood about it too, because I see it all over the place. So you see, this used to be a two-family home.
Yep.
It's now a four-family home
Yep.
because you can count the number of mailboxes. In fact, there may be
Yep.
even six mailboxes there. And you see this everywhere, mostly in cities in the United States. The taking of a single or a two-family home and subdividing it even further. And so what this does is it creates new housing units without actually creating new housing units. And this is an artifact of this financialization and
Yep.
manipulation and control of the housing stock rather than building new
And
housing stock.
and I want to note that in the language that is so popularly abused by housing activists who represent corporate real estate interests,
Yeah,
the person who did
some of
this
those
to
people
this
need a
home is a
wall.
developer.
Sorry, what did you say? I was
The
too.
person who did this to the home is the quote unquote
Yep,
developer that many pro corporate housing activists want to empower.
that's exactly right. I mean, no
Development does
doubt
not
about that.
actually develop, being a real estate developer does not actually necessarily entail being in construction. It can entail being a flipper who buys a property like this and
Yep.
converts it into multiple
And
family.
then you can have a TV show on house flipping, and you look like a
Exactly.
freaking hero. But anyway,
Exactly.
let's go to image 6. Now, this was something I found in the course of research for this show, for this program, and it was, I thought, important enough to bring up because
Okay.
Stevenson goes into this too in his videos. So when you have a situation of a dead labor economy, fixed assets getting more and more capital, which raises the price well beyond the rate of inflation, what you have is asset price inflation. So people who own homes, they think their wealth is going up, right? Oh, my
Yeah.
home was worth 200,000, now it's worth 300, now it's worth 4. So they think they're doing better, but the society is not doing better, and eventually those chickens come home to roost because uh, housing's not being created. It's just a manipulation of the existing stock. But this is interesting because, as this graphic shows, this actually shows two things. Actually, that's not the one I wanted to talk about, but we'll stay on this. So, this is from Haver.com, asset inflation cycles. And I have the wrong.
Which
The
image did you say again? I might have pulled up the wrong one.
No,
This is
no, no. You pulled up the one I said, but this is not the one I wanted to
gotcha.
reference. So let me just go ahead and read from another part of this same article.
Sure.
Asset price cycles do not generate public outcry like general inflation cycles do, even though history shows that asset price cycles can be equally destructive and destabilizing. That could be because asset price upswings can generate substantial wealth gains while general inflation penalizes everyone. So politicians have a mandate for financial stability, so they must stand up against the crowd even if it's politically unpopular. What this means is when you have the early phases of asset inflation, people don't think there's anything wrong. So they're not losing their jobs, or if they are, they're getting different jobs, but their home values are going up. So there's no outcry. There's no unemployment, employment is being shifted into lower wage jobs. People who have assets, they're seeing those prices going up. So when you look at the numbers of wealth and, the wealth that people have, or people just in their own lives, they feel like things are okay. They take out a mortgage equity loan or whatever, right? But this is not okay. And Stevenson talks about how this has played out in Britain too, uh, because eventually you get to a point where you don't have the asset anymore, and now you're back in the real economy, or the bubble collapses and housing prices return to a value that's more reflective of the actual assets available to the working class.
Yes. and when those corrections happen, there is, massive economic pain for the worst off people because it's never CEOs who get laid off.
Right, and let's go back to the same graphic
Sure.
because that was the next part of the analysis was that so how when there's a crash, what is the response of policymakers, and that's what this image that we had up was.
Yes. I did that again. There we go. That's better.
So they intervene in the market
Yeah.
to continue to maintain those inflated asset prices. That's what all this
like
verbiage
the
was.
rescue like the rescue of Silicon Valley Bank's asset
Yep.
by the Biden administration and the Fed, very well orchestrated for the specific benefit of
Right.
people like Elon Musk, who then decided, hey, now that Biden's bailed us out, let's fuck him and put Trump in charge and destroy the federal government.
Yeah, so you've got all these banks and other corporate owners that all own all of these assets or a lot of these assets. They're the ones that get bailed out. And when they get bailed out, what happens is the asset price reflates or maintains its inflated level. So the market correction that was occurring to reflect the fact that people can't afford these houses anymore, that goes away and the inflated price remains. There's no program to encourage the construction of affordable housing, to build up housing stock like it was during the productive economy. So this graphic here shows this is the response of a dead labor system.
Yep,
We're not gonna produce more housing. We're just gonna keep pumping money into the system to maintain the inflated
we're
price.
going to protect the way things are for us right
Yeah,
now.
bail out the people, not the banks. That was a real slogan, and
Yeah,
it really meant something. That's what it
yeah.
meant because that they didn't choose to
There,
bail out the people.
what I was involved with progressive groups that were demanding, actual serious policy change in 2020. One of the things that we kept repeating was a people's bailout, which of course Biden had no interest in whatsoever.
So another effect that we've touched on before is that when you have a dead labor economy, there's less need for living labor. So you can put up image 23, and this just gives a good example of it. If you want to build housing or anything else with social utility for the working class, you have to have manufacturing,
Yeah.
right? Now, there's another issue revolving around automation,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Definitely.
But separately from that, these are the numbers for manufacturing employment, right?
Yeah.
So now I'll talk about something that I haven't referenced with sources or images, but it's easily discovered. So you can see here in the United States again, manufacturing employment was at its highest in the 70s and 80s, or actually the 70s, which is at the same time that housing starts were at their maximum. That was the peak of the productive economy. And where is it now? Manufacturing employment is now roughly half of
I,
what it was at its peak
as
because
it
we're not
happens,
producing things that have social utility
as
for the
as it
masses.
as it happens, this is my industry. I work in manufacturing. I am in technical support for Leviton Manufacturing Company Incorporated. We make lighting controls.
Oh,
Uh,
that's good.
well, yes and no. It would be great if we made more of them, but that's another show. But
Well, you won't be making more in this economy.
no, well, and that's partly because of the way our supply chain works too, which is one of the reasons that these employee lists have declined here in the U.S.
I
When
just Yeah, go ahead,
my
sir.
company was founded, the majority of our employees worked in a factory on Long Island in New York, right?
Yeah.
When they took over the facility that I work at now in the 1990s, they were behind the curve in the sense that they were still a fairly traditional company, and the majority of their employees still worked in their factories in New York or here in
Yep.
the Portland, Oregon area.
Just
Um,
want to reference the fact that there are about 12, well, maybe 12 and a half million manufacturing workers in the United States. That is the major source of social power for
yes,
any country is the number
yes,
of manufacturing workers.
yes.
I just want to point out for people who don't know, China has anywhere from 120 million to 212 million manufacturing
Mhm.
employees, 10 to 20 times what the United States has. And their number of manufacturing employees has vastly increased. Now, I watched a video by Ray Dalio a couple of, like yesterday or whatever, and he identifies these cycles of the social power of a country in terms of the amount of economic output and other
Sure,
factors. And by economic output, I mean material economic output, productive output, not
sure.
financialized garbage. And the prediction is that this massive rise in the number of manufacturing employees in China is bound to fall.
Yeah.
Well, that's not a class analysis. That's like historicism, essentially. That whatever patterns you see are fixed and they happen, and there's no analysis as to why. That's Dalio's essential thesis. But
Sure.
Dalio's video itself is a whole other show. So anyway, so that's an illustration of how fewer and fewer jobs are available at the same time. Fewer and fewer new houses are being constructed at the same time that the prices of housing have continued to rise. They're
Yes.
something like 10 times what they were in the 1970s.
Yes.
And so
And
this all leads to another phenomenon called you know wage stagnation and concentration of wealth. And so images 20 through 22 can illustrate that.
let's start with 20 then.
There's a lot of graphics that illustrate these things, and the ones I
Oh,
picked are probably not the best.
this is a good one. I like this one. This is nice and straightforward and simple.
Well, that's what I tend to go for, but I can't say that for every choice I make.
Hey, that's fair, but this one's good.
Yeah.
I like
And
this.
this one only goes to '08. There has been an increase in real wages in the last, uh, I guess, 15 years now, but it still doesn't come close to where the wages were back during the
And
productive period.
and since the largest portion of that increase in real wages, which is immediately following the period where people pretended to care about COVID,
Yes, that's right.
there have been all sorts of efforts to discipline the workforce in ways to make that increase in real wages stretch as short as possible in order to maintain domination over the lives of
Yeah, I
employees.
mean, look, if your real wages are going up,
Yeah,
what does that matter if rents are increasing too?
exactly.
You
And
have
grocery prices are
a
increasing.
better image would probably have been something like what is the amount of disposable income left after
Yeah.
rents.
And here's a great intersection of public
But
health
while you're speaking, let's
fascism.
go on to 21. But go ahead.
Sure. Yes, I can do that. Let's see if I can talk and produce at the same time. One of the interesting
It's good
intersections
practice.
between labor exploitation and public health fascism, to me, is the fact that so many people have died as a result of COVID.
Yeah. So this is Sorota's
Yeah,
piece on, and I've tweeted about this myself a number of times over the years. But and I've done some calculations which I was not able to share for this program. But basically, something like 50 trillion to 70, I guess he's reporting $79 trillion in wealth was in effect stolen from the working class as a consequence of this shift from the productive to the non-productive economy. I mean,
yeah,
that's how I'm framing it. He
that's a
frames it a little differently.
but that's the right way to frame it because all taxation is redistribution of wealth. And the way that our taxation system is changing, we have gone away from taxing the income of the
Yeah.
highest paid lieutenants of the capitalists
Yeah.
to instead taxing the consumption of the lowest paid members of the working class.
That's right, and I'll talk briefly about that in a few minutes too, in
Yes,
reference to the Trump tariffs. But let's go on to 22.
yes, 22. And no, and the Trump tariffs are a great example because you can't. I mean, I would I would love to be able to magically bring a whole bunch of jobs back to the United States.
Not going to happen.
But the way the supply chain works, just to use my employer as an example, when I started, we owned two buildings right next to each other, one of which was almost entirely manufacturing and warehouse space with the offices and our technical support and customer service attached to it. And the other was entirely engineering with some warehouse space. And now we've combined everybody into those two buildings with almost no manufacturing, and basically we're just engineers, tech support, customer service, and warehouse space.
Yeah. So this graphic shows the phenomenon of concentration of wealth, which, as you mentioned before, is also a phenomenon in the emergence of fascism. But the little yellow line there at the bottom represents the majority of the population. That's how much we own.
Yes.
And if you take that piece and the next piece, that's 90% of the population, the dark green and the yellow. And that's and everything else is owned by 10% of the population. And the top one is 0.1% of the population. So about 200,000 people own like X amount of the household wealth available in the United States. That's concentration of wealth in fewer and fewer hands, which has a whole bunch of other effects. But it's a direct result of this shift from productive to non-productive economy.
And I want to give a clear example of what we mean when we say the ruling class, because this is a good, simple example, but it's not isolated. It's just an easy one. A family named Slotkin in the 1920s got a concession from the owners of the Detroit Tigers to monopolize selling hot dogs at what was then.
Are you from the Detroit area originally?
I'm not. I did research on this because I wanted to know who the Slotkin family were.
Well, I'm from the Detroit area originally, so this is a story that's near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, so the Slotkin family, because of this monopoly on hot dog concessions at
Tiger Stadium.
Yeah. They turned their meat company turns this into a national brand called Ballpark Franks.
Yep.
And they go from being local gentry into huge national millionaires.
Yeah, they did this. The guy who owns Little Caesars Pizzas has essentially done the same.
Yeah,
thing.
but as far as I know, none of the Slotkins have kept anybody like Rosa Parks alive, and
that's true. He does have a good record of philanthropy, but I'm not.
And of philanthropy that's not just manipulative and I mean, and I hate to give anybody credit, but this is where we are of philanthropy that's not just for some selfish motivation. People found out about this after she was dead and there was less credit to be had.
That is true. Yeah.
So I just thought I'd mention that when you mentioned him. But yeah, no, the Slotkins are this interesting story of how,
for people who don't know, talking about Rosa Parks, I mean, she's the famous resistor who refused to move the back of the bus. She eventually did move to Detroit, and we found out after the fact that she was maintained, with a subsidy from the owner of Little Caesars Pizza and also the Red Wings, the hockey team. Yeah.
Yes. And I've always found that to be very interesting.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of capitalist philanthropy, but if we're going to have it, let's have it more like that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So let's go to image, the next one, 22.
Yes, but so there's always a joke I think of. One of my favorite champagne socialists in the 1930s was Humphrey Bogart.
Oh, really?
Yes, and then he became more of a traditional liberal, of course, in order to maintain his career. But he was a big champagne socialist in the 1930s, and during that period. Which one are we on now?
30 or 22.
22, yes. Okay. And but anyway, in his famous movie Sabrina, he says to his brother, "Don't make it sound so cynical. This isn't the heir to the hot dog dynasty, marrying the son of the mustard king, and then so Elisa Slotkin is Princess Hot Dog.
You're making me hungry, man.
I'm sorry. That is not my purpose. My purpose was to make people more sort of, they chose the heir to the hot dog dynasty to give the rebuttal to the State of the Union.
I think we need to go to number 22, and that is 21 that you're on. Or no, that you are
This
on
is
22.
22.
I'm sorry. My mistake. Okay, so I guess we can segue into the next one.
Let me go to 21 maybe. And
No, we already looked at that one.
okay.
Or did we?
23 then? Which one? Sorry.
I don't. Let's just go on to the next section,
Oh, sure.
which is the critical issue: the shift of productive to a non-productive economy.
Yeah. The
Can
unringing bell.
can it? The question is, can it be reversed? And that question is now come up because that's what the
Tariff.
current administration is saying their tariffs will do. Right? We're going to reshore manufacturing to the United States, and we're going to go back to a point where everybody had manufacturing jobs or had, somebody in their family was able to support, their extended family because they had a good. That is not going to happen.
Now
Okay?
here's where I put on my idealist theory hat and pretend that some sort of reform was possible under capitalism and say, if the ruling class really wanted to protect their power, this is where they would actually do something intelligent, like subsidize forced consumption with some sort of universal basic income. But they're unwilling to do that because they would rather not, because their whole purpose is to maximize quarterly profits.
Well, they're really good at maintaining their power, but they don't. With let's say it. That's again. This is a whole nother show.
Well, yeah, no, it comes down to the whole the 1970s ethical change where the commitment becomes maximize profits this quarter.
There are, this quarter or the next 2 years or whatever. There's a lot of things that they could do to maintain their power long term, like UBI, for example. But they can't. Anything that in that regard, for example, take UBI for example, which I agree with you. People would find it good. Average people would say, "Okay, I'm getting basic income," and that would maintain the power of the capitalist class. That would go. But the problem is the capitalists cannot agree among themselves to give money to people who aren't working. Because that's their ideological framework just can't encompass that, even though it would be rational in the sense of maintaining their power over the long term.
This is where it's very worth noting that the capitalist class frequently shares a reactionary moral system in which they pat themselves on the back for how hard they worked for their money, even as they enjoy their game of golf.
So, as I've been saying on Twitter for the last week, it seems like, the Trump tariffs are not an economic policy. They are not a trade policy. They are a tax policy.
Yes.
And I will prove it. Image 5.
Yes. And it is true. They are a.
There is no intention of reshoring manufacturing. If there was, then the program illustrated by Image 5 would not have been deleted.
True. Why can I not get back there? Give me a sec here. Sorry. Oh, I know what I need to do.
There's some deeper stuff that I can go into very briefly here once we get the
I just want to make sure that I am getting my files back. I closed the wrong window.
I hate when I do that.
Yes. All right. Image 5?
Yeah.
That's what I thought. So there's image 5. And here we go. Now, share screen. I love I hate to advertise for my streaming service too much because it's kind of expensive. I wish it were cheaper, but I love their screen sharing features. If I didn't keep closing the wrong window, this would be really easy.
So here's a program to essentially subsidize manufacturing, right? To one degree or another. It's what the Chinese do.
Yeah.
There's a lot of government intervention in maintaining their manufacturing and expanding their manufacturing base. That's why the Chinese economy has grown so phenomenally in the
Yeah.
last 40 years. That program in the United States was canceled
Yes.
by
And
Trump.
and
So
and
there's no intention of boosting manufacturing in the United
and,
States.
and what's more is that this is the sort of thing that Wall Street deliberately pushes for
Yeah.
because of their ridiculously reactionary morality.
Now, there's a segment that was I don't have it linked or anything, but people can look this up. There's a segment of Stephen Miller, one of the Trump group, on TV talking about the very fact of the transfer of the tax burden
Yes.
from a progressive income tax to now more tariff based.
Yes.
So that's the intent. And Miller's the only one in the Trump crowd that actually said it openly, but that's the intent.
And this is a return, and you want to know how far reactionary this really is.
It's the 1890s all over
This
again.
is a return to the Jeffersonian ideal of the revenue tariff, where the
Yeah.
whole government is funded by the tariff.
So a more Marxist, or let me just shift into my Marxist mode for a minute.
Of course.
So when you have a productive economy, what happens is capital starts to build up and accumulate
Yes.
or wealth. Some of that accumulation ends up with the working class. Over time, more of it tends to be concentrated in smaller and smaller groups
Yes.
in the ruling class. And so Lenin said, I'm paraphrasing, in productive economies, capital and assets are built up. And what happens is that this causes the rate of profit to fall because you have to pay workers wages and so on.
Yeah.
If cars or housing are built over and above domestic demand prices, wages remain good, but this all squeezes the profit margin down to a few percentage points of ROI. In capitalism, the solution, quote unquote, to this is the export of surplus capital, where the rate of profit can be increased. So you start offshoring manufacturing to increase the rate of exploitation of labor. You start offshoring, inputs like lumber or whatever to cheaper places or other places rather than domestically. That's the whole export of capital phenomenon that Lenin described.
And it
And
costs
that's
less.
exactly why this cannot be reshoring manufacturing, reversing a non-productive economy into a productive economy cannot happen. It violates fundamental laws
And
of the accumulation of
and
capital
yet
and the export of capital.
and yet, and I want to say this because I want to draw deficiencies to both sides. On the one hand, you have the lying Trump administration claiming that we're going to magically re-onshore industry just with tariffs and no other policy,
Yeah, I
which is
mean,
a lie.
so another way to look at it is, there are countries that have massively increased their
Yeah.
productive base. The U.S. did
Yeah.
it in the 30s and 40s. China did it. Russia did it, right? The
I had
Soviet
a,
Union.
I
So
had
how
a,
did they do that? It was massive government intervention in the whole
two
process,
words,
along
two
with
words.
planning and a systematic structure in which the goal wasn't profit, it was to increase housing, to increase the social educational base, or whatever it was, or fight a war against the Nazis, or whatever it was.
For those interested,
If the object is private profit, then all the other objects become secondary.
and
So, like
for the
increasing housing is not going to happen either.
for the for the purpose of education, I want to boil everything down to two words for people who don't know the term state capital.
Yeah.
In order to actually rebuild a system, we would need to be willing to invest in state
And
capital.
There's a lot of argument in the Marxist spaces about state
Of
capital and
course.
all of that,
But
and we can
regardless,
do a whole nother show on that.
regardless of arguments about state capital or not, I had
So
a Democrat. I had a Democrat on the show back in 2021, 2022. Very big advocate named Ron Kim, state assemblyman from New York. One of the people who critically outed Mario. Sorry, I misnamed him by his
one of
last.
the Cuomos.
Outed Andrew Cuomo for sending people to nursing homes to die.
What a piece of garbage that guy is.
Yeah. Anyway, so Ron Kim was on the show basically saying, there's all sorts of ways in a liberal Keynesian social democratic framework where the United States could and should be using state capital in order to provide for both certain productive economic needs to build things up again, and also to provide basic social services. But there is immense, and as a New Yorker, he would know, there is immense opposition from Wall Street to any sort of state capital because state capital renders Wall Street obsolete.
It effectively competes with private capital.
Exactly.
So this is from Ha Jun Chang. When you give tariff protection, what happens, let's just talk about it in idealist terms. When you give tariff protection, what happens is that those that are doing domestic manufacturing get extra profits, right? Even though because the foreign competition in those goods is eliminated, so they sell more. We know that even in the medium term, that all breaks down. But the theory is that it gives the domestic producers additional profits, additional resources. What do they do with those additional resources in this system right now? Over the last 25 years, every time corporations have gotten extra resources, whether it's increased sales, bailouts, subsidies, tax credits, what do they do with those extra resources?
Dividends, bonuses, buybacks.
That's right. Dividends, that's exactly right. I don't even have to elaborate. They don't invest in productive infrastructure.
Nope.
Anybody who's watching the show can look this up. There is no investment in productive infrastructure even when the companies have additional resources. That is another reason why these tariffs will not result in an expansion of the manufacturing base, even assuming that everything works as they imagine it will.
You would think that just in terms of basic personal benefit, you would think that Elon Musk would support state support for manufacturing because he's a manufacturer. Except, of course, manufacturing is not his real business. He's a contractor whose real business is in the dead labor sector.
Do you know Tesla's price to earnings ratio is 126?
Yeah.
It's like 10 times what a normal PE ratio is. But anyway, let me go on to Lenin. The third reason that this is going to happen, this is not going to happen, the reshoring of manufacturing, is from parasitism and the decay of capitalism. Imperialism is an immense accumulation of money capital in a few countries and a few people within the ruling classes of those countries. Hence the extraordinary growth of a class, or rather stratum, of rentiers. People who live by clipping coupons, who take no part in any enterprise whatsoever, whose profession is idleness. The export of capital, one of the most essential bases of imperialism, still more completely isolates the rentiers, like Elon Musk, from production and sets the seal of parasitism on the whole country that lives by exploiting the labor of several overseas countries and colonies. I can't think of a better description of the West than that. And he wrote that over 100 years ago, still applies today.
So there is a historical progression here. From the moment when the Pope divided the world between Spain and Portugal till now.
Yeah, Tordesillas.
Where we have seen massive powers in Europe. Well, not massive. We have seen massive accumulations of power and wealth by states in Europe exploiting the Americas, Africa, East Asia. We have seen that countries like Russia, which were left out of the exploitation of the U.S. of North America and South America and Africa, and were late to the exploitation of Asia, were in an extremely backward position in their great power competition with both economically and militarily with their imperialist rivals prior to the world wars.
Yeah.
We see how being colonized rather than a participant in colonialism set China back for centuries.
Yeah, and by the way, China was the number one economy up until about the 1600s.
We have seen how a transition from being the seat of the Portuguese Empire, despite there technically being a king of Portugal, to being to abuse a far too Western chauvinist word a little bit, a banana republic in Brazil has dramatically changed the lives of people in Brazil. There was a time when Brazil was considered more powerful and important in world affairs than the United States.
Yeah. So this gets me to more or less the end of my notes. I've got a few other items on. I don't have any more graphics, but there's a few other items that people can look up. Peter Ryan's done some tweets on this that prove beyond a shadow of a doubt in my mind that there is not going to be any reshoring of manufacturing, even assuming that the tariffs don't blow up the world economy in the first place. There's no rational planning. There's no conception of investment in productive infrastructure. It's not going to be engendered by the tariffs. Tariffs didn't create the productive economy. The productive economy was created, has always been created by one of two things or both in combination. One is state intervention to do specifically that, or through subsidies and planning and competence. And or social revolution, which replaces the class that is not able to create a productive economy.
And the social,
and that leads us to conclude. That leads us to the last segment, and I don't really have much on this, but how do we change it and how do we destroy it? We can leave that open for a brief discussion here.
Well, ultimately, in my opinion, and my former co-host occasionally, and who I hope will be my guest and collaborator again in the future when we're able to get it scheduled, Renee Johnston, has said that we need to be able to divest from capitalism completely and somehow and become self-supporting.
I couldn't agree more with Renee Johnson and you. Yeah. So there's no historical example.
How we do that is a political and technical and organizing question.
Yes, absolutely. There is no historical example throughout all of recorded history of a non-productive economy, of a productive economy becoming non-productive and then reversing course and becoming productive again. There's no example of that.
No, I mean, the only thing, the best, I mean, the closest thing you can come to, no, you can't. I mean, the best example that you can think of is that Western manufacturing, such as it has recovered, has only recovered because of the manipulation of the supply chain. 90% of
the export of capital bringing cheaper and cheaper.
90% of the manufacturing labor done by my employer is done in Mexico or China.
Yeah.
Most of the manufacturing labor done in my company in either New York or Portland here is assembly as opposed to construction, if you understand the difference.
Yeah, final production.
Assembly of final product rather than manufacture of components.
Right.
Whereas
and then you still get to put the Made in USA label on it.
Yes, and which raises, made in the USA does not actually necessarily mean made in the USA.
Yeah, it's in effect a lie that is perpetrated precisely to hide the fact that it's a non-productive economy.
And there is a worse setup to it, which is in the 10% of the time where made in the USA is actually true, it means prison labor.
Oh, don't get me started on that.
The number of things that are made in prisons and then have the Made in the USA label slapped on them would blow your mind. Or
No,
maybe
it wouldn't, because
you're
I've looked at it. But you're right. You're absolutely right. The actually the capitalist class, as I'm sure you know, has been a bit back and forth on prison labor.
yes.
So sometimes they support it, and other times they don't. It depends on other
Well,
conditions.
you're
We are getting into a phase now where the capitalist class is moving
look,
towards
I'm
supporting
going to put
slave
on my
labor more.
I'm going to get a little literary here. And I'm going to quote a couple of different characters in the same literary work by the same author. So if it seems like I'm having a conversation with myself, that's on purpose. But Mr. Scrooge, some of them cannot go. And so, no, I'm starting too early. I'm sorry. Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?
Wait, are you doing this from memory, Chris?
Are the Poor Act and the treadmill not still in effect? I'm sorry to say they are, Mr. Scrooge. Then my taxes support these institutions,
Yeah.
and many people will have to go to them. But Mr. Scrooge, many cannot go, and some would rather die. If they would rather die, then let them do it and reduce the surplus population.
How are you doing this from memory? That's astounding.
I mean, I am not a theater person, so I can say that it is not anywhere near as accurate as it might be if I were an actor or anything like
Well,
that.
I once taught a class for people taking college credits on English. How was the subject? Well, it was more of a remedial English class. But I began the remedial English class with two examples of great writing. One was Dickens,
Yes.
where I used a passage from Tale of Two Cities. The other was Malcolm X.
Yep.
And the reason I loved the Malcolm X passage was because Malcolm X started from a position of not being terribly literate, having never picked up a dictionary in his life until he went to prison. And he
Sure.
admits that.
Yes.
And so what I was trying to do was encourage my students
Yes.
to say, look, it doesn't matter where you start from. It's a matter of where you decide you want to go.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to do as a class.
Yes.
We have, as a working class, we have to decide that we are going to align with each other and against capitalism. And however we do that, the object has to be clear for everyone. We have to displace the capitalist class. That is the only path to creating a productive economy. There's no example of a productive economy being restarted by the class that made it a non-productive economy. This class is incapable of doing that. They're the ones that created the situation. Only we can change it to reflect our material interests and our desire, our hopes, and our necessity to move forward in life and in civilization.
And I think that's important. The reason that I reference Dickens specifically here is because we are seeing the prison and the workhouse combine to become a
Yes.
place where people are both, where undesirables are warehoused like the prison, and where the poor are forced to labor for their moral uplift, whether it is productive or not, like the workhouse.
Well, and in a dead labor economy, right, the ruling class wants slaves.
Yes. And
In a,
prison is perfect.
in a
Prison is the
productive
slavery
economy where
loophole.
you're paying workers, it's very hard to get workers to give that up.
And because I'm from originally California and now live in Portland, Oregon, both, West Coast wildfire states,
Oh my God.
I want to make a note about how prison labor works in California when it
No,
comes
yeah,
to
a
fire.
lot of prisoners in the
Well,
firefighting.
more than just
Yeah.
that, though. There are a lot of prisoners, but beyond that, California prison firefighters are some of the best firefighters in the world.
And they can't get a job as a
They can't
firefighter
get a
after
job
they
when
leave
they get
prison.
out of prison because the Federal Wildlife Service, the State Wildlife Service, the Federal
Yeah.
Forest Service, the State Forest Service, none of them will hire felons.
Another great example of the difference between a productive and a non-productive economy. You have people with all this talent,
The,
got it on the
the,
job, and now, but because we have a
the,
non-productive economy, they can't be hired.
the most skilled and experienced professionals in their industry are blacklisted from working in their industry anywhere
Yeah.
except in prison.
Yep.
They
Good
are
example.
most valuable to society in prison. How
Yeah.
disgusting is that?
Their social utility is universal, but is essentially is negated by the non-productive or dead labor economy. Listen, I think we covered a lot of
Yes.
ground, and I hope people were able to get some sense of what we're talking about, and are now looking for opportunities to enact some of these ideas to move forward in their
I
own lives.
believe people found it interesting simply for the reason that from 30 minutes in to the end of the show, we have doubled our viewership instead of losing viewership. That would seem to suggest we did something right today.
Maybe it was just luck.
Hey,
Well, let's leave it there. It was a real pleasure, Chris. I so much appreciate being
I
able to
would
be here.
I would love to have you on for something like this again. One of the things that I was thinking when I moved this to Sunday was of the fact that back in the 1920s, in the original first great socialist wave in the United States, they had socialist Sunday school.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah.
It was something that was deliberately given as an alternative to church.
Yeah, I know about red diaper babies from the
Yep.
period. Yeah.
But no, is the socialist Sunday school was an alternative to church for working class education.
Well, your reference to Ballpark Franks unfortunately has meant that I now have to get some some
Go
food.
ahead and
So,
enjoy your lunch since
yeah.
it's starting to
Thanks
get
so
back
much,
to
and
you.
whoever's listening, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
And as always, I want to thank everyone who joined us today. Again, you can follow us on Twitter at Eclectic Radical. You can follow us on Blue Sky at Eclectic Radical. I occasionally remember to post there. I apologize. You can follow us on Substack at Eclectic Radical. I am still remembering to get all these posted as podcasts to Substack for people who want to be able to download the audio. Which means you can, even though I am in no way affiliated with them, because of the way Substack works, you can download the show on Spotify. You can follow the show on YouTube, and if you want to become a supporter, we're Patreon. Eclectic
Every time
Radical.
I watch Chris's show, I always learn something.
I've
No
tried to
question.
make it easy for everyone to find me. It's Eclectic Radical everywhere I am. And of course, I'm hyperactive on Twitter. So until next week, I will tweet at you. Thank you very much, folks.
Thank you.
And